Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our event, Perceiving Climate Change, event number 4. And this one is focusing in upon, I guess we'd call it climate education, but I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. My name's Luke Bennett, and I'm the convener for today, and you're all very welcome indeed. So let's get the show on the road. Some housekeeping points. There will actually be three main presentations tonight. We've lost one presentation to illness, so we may be finished by 9. Please do comment and raise questions via the chat function, and we'll sweep those up at the end of each presentation and also have a bit of a panel discussion at the end. This event is being recorded, and it's being recorded for raw upload, not live, but the idea is that I don't have to edit it. So please don't make a spoken contribution if we turn the mics on and say anything that you wouldn't want to be blurted all over the internet, because it will be. So that's the health warning. It is possible to say things that you regret, I suppose, and were that to be the case, then I'm giving a sort of 24-hour confessional period, and won't upload this until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening at the earliest. So there's the email address you can see on the screen, who and how you need to contact me to plead for me to do some editing, which I really don't want to do. So you'd have to persuade me, but maybe I'd be persuadable. Okay, so that's the housekeeping out of the way. This is the 4th event in the 2024 series of Sheffield Hallam University Space and Place Group events. In recent years, we've had an annual sort of theme, and we've therefore grouped sessions around a particular theme. And this year's theme is Perceiving Climate Change, and I'll say a bit more about that shortly. In previous years, we've had themes such as changing places, haunting, and various other exciting and productive discussion points, which are all captured for posterity on our YouTube channel, should you be so tempted. This is the 4th event in our sequence, and I guess there's an odd trajectory to the 4 events in that the first 3 were pretty much elemental and not focused upon the human, particularly as the object of perception, the thing that was being perceived. But this evening we turn our attention towards humans and human perception and the encouragement of human perception, and perhaps grope towards something that we might ambitiously call solutions, or if not solutions, then at least action. So the underlying proposition that connected these presentations together, that made up the theme, is that it's very hard to sort of sense, to see, to touch, to smell climate change. Its sort of temporalities are so stretched over sort of geological time. Its forms of happening are so intangible to our direct senses. We've been exploring in the previous sessions, okay, so how do you notice glaciers shrinking? How do you notice rising water levels? What are the metrics that are used by various disciplines, and how can each discipline speak to other disciplines and share that information and build that greater understanding and insight? So I'm not going to go through the titles that you'll see on these slides. These are just sort of basically to highlight, you know, the range of disciplines that we've had involved in the conversations that we've been trying to build during the sequence of events, and which are available as recordings on the YouTube site. So as I say, the first event concerned ice and perception of ice-based climate change. The second event concerned the water world. And we had a nice spread of a variety of disciplines there, reflecting into that topic. We then turned our attention to heat, and we sort of concentrated on 2 things which sort of fit together quite nicely. One was the sort of the death of the coal fire and the sort of the how we would cope with losing the ambience of coal and nostalgia for coal and the delights of post-coal and so on and so forth. And then we looked at heat more widely in terms of heat as an engineered aspect of built environments in terms of thermal comfort and heat islands in cities and so forth. So for this evening's events, turning our attention towards education as a form of action to raise insight and awareness, we have tabled 4 presentations. We've actually lost one of those presentations, so we may be finished by 9 due to illness. So I'm afraid that the Ego to Echo presentation is not going to be provided on this occasion. We may get an opportunity to do it again at some point in the future. So we've got 3 presentations which we'll turn to shortly. And as my sort of opening warm-up semi-presentation, I thought I could say something about how do we perceive green jobs? What ways of noticing, what ways of monitoring, what data can we access in order to confirm our feeling that there will be green jobs, there will be ever more opportunity and necessity for green jobs, and are they coming or aren't they coming? And so that got me thinking about, well, how are people researching this? Because it does rather seem that green jobs are a little bit ephemeral as a sort of desired beast, a unicorn wandering in the woods, even out of the mouth of the likes of Boris Johnson from the 2021, one of the many climate strategies that has fallen by the wayside. But you know, this promise here of 100,000 retrofit-based jobs by the mid-2020s. Well, we're nearly at the mid-2020s. I don't think we've quite got to 100,000 retrofitters out there just yet, and I don't think we're on course for 175,000 by 2030. So politicians, when it suits them, like to make claims that there's a great big need for green jobs coming through, but they can be quite hard to spot on the ground. So in thinking this one through, I thought, okay, so who might be researching this? So I went along to a wonderful online resource called CEDEFOP. And you don't get to say the word CEDEFOP or the acronym CEDEFOP very often, but I think CEDEFOP needs to be said quite a few times, really. CEDEFOP is a wonderful acronym that doesn't get used well enough. And whisper it quietly, it's something to do with the EU. Just absorb that for a moment. We're in that territory, folks. Sorry to make you feel uncomfortable. The EU is still doing stuff. They didn't stop when we left. They carried on doing stuff, and some of it's quite useful. There we are. There's a value judgment being made. Anyway, the European Centre for the Development of Vocational Training is what CEDEFOP stands for. And the next few slides will draw out what I think are some interesting points from a study that they did using big data by analysing I don't know what the full size of the data set was, but many thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of online job adverts, and data mining those job adverts to try and work out how many of those were green jobs and whether they were increasing or shrinking. So I've got three graphs for you to draw out some points from. So this is all about, you know, how do you perceive stuff through data and graphs and stuff. So the green line here is jobs that have a bit of green flavour in them, whereas blue is unique, newly invented green jobs. And you can see that the blue line, there's 2 different axes at work here, but the trend is what matters. The blue line is fairly static. So the number of new, novel, not seen before green professions is there, but it's fairly static across the time period of 2018 to 2022. What is increasing, the green line in other words, is jobs which already existed in the economy, but which could be included within a generous definition of green jobs. So another way of putting that is to say some jobs are becoming more greenified rather than new jobs are appearing. And if we look at a sectoral breakdown, this is work that they did as part of their data mining to look at those online job adverts, OJA is online job adverts, to look at them by sector across a 3-year period and to see which of those job adverts used the expression circular economy. And you can see that across the 3 years, in each of those sectors, each of those market sectors, the number of job adverts, including reference to circular economy, was increasing, but also that the increase was much bigger in certain sectors than in others. And I think that's to do with maturity of, I don't know, it's a pompous phrase, I can't think of an easy way to say it, maturity of environmental insight. So the prevalence of environmental terminology, environmental retooling in the energy sector and in the transport sector is much bigger than it is, for example, in manufacturing or retail. Which brings me to the final graph, which is another way of sort of saying the same thing. So if you look at these job adverts for newly invented green jobs, these are sort of more general jobs that have an environmental flavouring now sprinkled into them in terms of the job adverts. We see that occurring much more in infrastructural type parts of the economy than we do in areas like manufacturing, real estate, retail. All of the sectors shown here are, in CEDEFOP's view, high climate impact sectors, but what this shows is two things. Some sectors are far more on the message than others. And what it also shows is the degree of, as it says there, green pervasiveness. So how much are ordinary and semi-green jobs, or jobs that are starting to get an environmental sort of flavour added into them, how much of that is happening? How pervasive are green skills becoming within a broad spectrum of employment opportunities? And we see a sectoral inequality on that. Some sectors are a lot more on message and are spreading green pervasiveness into much of their workforce in terms of the recruitment stance, at least, than others. And some of the ones that aren't very switched on, some of the sectors that are not very switched on, need to be, because they also have major needs for transition and retooling. So I think the message I'm trying to embed here is, yeah, of course, there will be new professions that are specifically and distinctly environmental for which people will need to be trained. But perhaps the more important area to focus on is the way in which many types of existing jobs will need to transition into an upskilling of environmental awareness. And this final slide seeks to show on a regional basis, and apologies that the text is a bit blurry. When I tried to screen grab it, that was as good as I could get it because it was blurry in the original. What it shows us is that the traditional manufacturing areas of the country, so the world outside London, because London is right over at the right-hand side of the graph, the smaller the bar, the fewer the hours of training that it is assessed that workers need to get them to a baseline of environmental competency. So in the manufacturing areas of the north, that's where a larger amount of reskilling of workers are needed than in the south, which of course is the wrong way around because we need it in the north. Anyway, various initiatives that I've spotted, including an event being hosted at but not run by Sheffield Hallam on Saturday, South Yorkshire Climate Justice and Green Jobs event, which there's a QR code for there. And I also spotted that Sheffield's FE College is offering various courses. Yeah, great, need all of that. but I guess what I'm trying to introduce here is there's skill for employment, and that's something I don't think any of the other presentations are going to particularly be focused on today, because what they're more concerned with is environmental awareness in its general sense as an education for life rather than education for work. Both of those two things are important, but I just thought I'd throw in the education for jobs bit as a starter. Anyway, there we are. If anyone's got any questions for me, we can pick those up in the panel session at the end. So I'm going to stop butchering on now and hand over to Romina. Romina, if you'd like to share your screen, I'll turn my sharing off.
Great, thank you. So I'll just pull up my slides and you can all just check if you can see them. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So hi everyone. So my name's Romina. I'm a medical doctor by background, and I've also studied ethics, medical ethics. I've got healthcare ethics background, but at Hallam my predominant role is as a senior lecturer in leadership for health and social care. And I'm really here to talk really about how we can inspire climate action through the health lens and through health education. And obviously we'll all come to this from different angles. Everyone that's joined this session, you're obviously a self-selected group that care already, but we will all come to this from different angles. And I think it is really important to think of the why of the work. So I'm just going to tell you my why. This is my why. This is my little boy. He's almost 6 now, but although at this photo he was 3. And it was really when I was pregnant with him that I had this overwhelming realization of how fragile and delicate the world was, and made a promise to him when he was a little baby that I would do everything I could to protect his future and his health. And really that's kind of my driver every single day, and why I just keep persevering with what I'm doing. But we'll all come at this from different angles, and we'll all have different whys. And as kind of Luke's outlined, like this whole series has been about how we perceive climate change and the non-human elements. Some people really connect with the idea of like wildlife and protecting wildlife and the beauty of the natural world and glaciers and ice caps. And I think sometimes humans can very easily disconnect ourselves from things that we can't immediately see, such as human nature. But I think increasingly what we can't ignore is when things are obviously impacting us, humans, our kin, our people. And increasingly that's becoming noticeable, like every week, every month, almost every day there's another headline, including Spain just in the last few days, that's just showing us the implications of this that this has on us, on humans. And particularly which I don't think has necessarily received the attention it deserves, but I think it is a real kind of clincher and does spark a lot of motivation that perhaps other narratives don't as much, is how much this impacts our health. And you can see here that that in the summer of 2022 there were around 4,000 excess deaths, so people that wouldn't have died that died because of the heat waves that we had in that summer. That during that summer there were hospitals that their IT systems crashed because it was so hot. The operating theatres weren't able to work because the ventilation systems didn't work because it got so hot, so loads of operations were cancelled. And also things like when there's significant rain and flooding, that actually our infrastructure isn't actually resilient enough to manage that. 10% of NHS infrastructure is built on the floodplain. So when you think you've got this kind of severe like emergency, and you really want your last port of call, like your last man standing, you really want it to be the NHS and the health system. But actually we've had to turn people away from hospitals because of flooding. And you can see this is in Yorkshire, this ambulance that is just kind of floating away with the paramedic taking a photo of his van just kind of floating away. And this picture here is a picture of Elika Sedebra, who probably many of you will know this, but she was the first child to have first person to have air pollution listed as the cause of death on her death certificate. And why am I telling you that? Why am I telling you any of this? Well, because it's just to really connect with the fact that this is something that isn't a distant threat. It's something that's happening now. It's impacting us. It's impacting our communities. It's impacting our children today. And I think just to kind of really hammer home the implications that this has on health and how much this education piece I think is really needed. this slide it's a bit of a scary slide, but it is a really informative slide, just showing how kind of the impacts of rising temperatures, extreme weather, and all these things, how these really play out for health. So you can see, for example, with the burning of fossil fuels, you get more air pollution, and that has significant implications on lungs and hearts, and increases dementia and diabetes, amongst other things. And I've already alluded to the idea of how extreme heat can lead to heat-related illnesses, particularly for vulnerable people, elderly, babies that can't regulate their temperature, and people who work outside or things like that, which puts them more at risk. And the things that I think are particularly concerning around the changes in vector ecology, so that means the different kind of diseases that we're likely to see in countries that we're not used to seeing it, and we don't necessarily have the kind of resilience and the infrastructure to manage some of that. So we're already seeing rises in dengue fever, for example, across Europe, and it's very possible that we'll have malaria in the UK by the middle of this century. Because of the rising temperatures, amongst other things that are on the slide that I won't go through because I don't have time, but just to kind of highlight as well, with severe weather, obviously we see on the news the injuries and fatalities that happen because of flooding or extreme weather or hurricanes, but also the real mental health impacts that affect people. We know 1 in 3 people that experience flooding, for example, go on to have post-traumatic stress disorder. So it really does have quite significant health impacts. And that's kind of not necessarily including kind of eco-anxiety and climate grief and all those kind of other elements that impact mental health as well. But I think as well as all the other things on this that I won't go through, but I think what sometimes people, when they think about health, they assume that health starts with hospitals, nurses, operations, medicines, but obviously it really doesn't. And actually, health starts with having access to water, to food, to clean air, comfortable temperatures to live on, and peace on earth. And if we don't have those things, those are the core foundations of our health, then we don't have health. And so in turn, what I think is really critical is that you can't have healthy people on a sick planet. And I think sometimes people, we can sometimes disconnect ourselves from the natural world or think that we're even the rulers of the natural world, but actually we really need a healthy planet around us in order for us to be healthy. So when the planet's sick, we're sick. So yeah, it is worth acknowledging that the climate crisis is a health crisis, which is what I hopefully alluded to already with what I'm trying to say. But I think there's also so much profound opportunity for health by engaging in climate action, and the health voice and the education around the health piece has a really strong voice here. And that's partly because I like this slide, what if it's all a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Well, exactly. So, if the climate deniers are right, let's assume the climate deniers are right and none of that's real. Actually, all of the stuff that we need to do to mitigate against climate change is all better for health, because who doesn't want greener cities? Who doesn't want healthier diets? Who doesn't want affordable energy? Who doesn't want their friends and family to live long, happy lives? Like, everybody wants those things, and those things are all better for health. So you can see so the climate crisis is actually quite a profound health opportunity, and there's so many co-benefits of action on climate change that actually it's worth kind of acknowledging that. And if you can just even if you just look at this picture here, like, it just looks so beautiful. Like, can you imagine just having lovely green and blue cities, like green and blue spaces everywhere? Not only does it cool our cities down and reduce air pollution, but it gives us time in natural space, and that's way better for our mental and physical health, as well as having infrastructure that makes walking and cycling much easier. Not only would that reduce air pollution, but obviously it keeps people fitter and healthier, reduces obesity and so on. And locally sourced plant-based diet. So we know, people will always often talk about plant-based diets, and being vegan is better environmentally, which we know that, but it's also massively better for health. So actually we know that red meat, for example, massively associated with bowel cancer. So actually the kind of narrative around this, if we kind of focus on what we need to do for health, it's actually a lot of them is the same in terms of what we need to do for climate. And kind of, I think sometimes maybe that lens around how we can create a better world for everyone by focusing on the health narrative is really important, as health is a universal currency that we all share. It's a kind of dialogue that we all understand. But I think perhaps even in healthcare, sometimes people have struggled with that in some ways, because health is often seen as this real positive contribution to people's lives, healthcare. When I went to medical school, I thought I was going to go around saving lives. And actually, healthcare is a double-edged sword, because where clinicians are, you know, expected to be saving lives, we're actually doing that in a system that is harmful to health, because the emissions that we create by providing care is deeply damaging to human health at the same time. And whilst we all sign up to kind of first doing no harm, actually we are doing quite a lot of harm because of our high emission healthcare. And people often assume high emission equals high quality, and that's not the case. And a lot of the care that we provide that is kind of unnecessarily high emitting is actually in turn quite damaging to health for the reasons that I've laid out. So we know that the NHS has, you know, the 4 to 5% of UK emissions are from the NHS. You know, 1 in 20 cars on the road are attributed to being there because of the NHS. So the emissions from the NHS are similar to like the emissions from entire countries. So we are like a massive emitter as a healthcare system. And so kind of thinking about that's really important when we're thinking about what our commitment is really to the delivery of health and positive healthcare. And I think increasingly people are recognising that, and educators are recognising that, and regulators are recognising that. So you've gradually got an acknowledgement within health professional regulators saying, actually, yeah, this is a requirement for health professionals to understand and something that they need to educate their patients on. I would argue, and have argued and have published on the fact that none of this actually goes far enough, and would strongly advocate that it goes much further given the scale of the health threats. But there is progress. You know, the NHS is seen as a world leader, as the first health system to commit to reaching net zero by 2040, which is enshrined in law now. So there is some things to be to sort of celebrate over, that we are making some good progress. But in terms of how do we educate health professionals, considering, you know, we have to think about the employability angle in terms of how we educate around some of this. And I think there is some progress in the health space, but we are still got a lot of work to do. And I think we really do a disservice to our students as health professionals, if we're focusing on health education for a moment, around what they really need to understand in order for them to be able to navigate the kind of world that we're increasingly living in, and being responsible climate conscious clinicians. And the first thing that they have to understand is being able to describe how the environment and human health interact, which I've basically described. You know, you can't have healthy people on a sick planet. And that is such a core basic understanding that we need everyone, but specifically health professionals, to understand. And the second thing is being able to contribute and improve the environmental sustainability of health systems. So kind of acknowledging, actually, I need to think about how I can make my health system be less harmful, so that I do feel like I'm saving lives, rather than kind of creating loads of emissions that are actually deeply harmful. And the third thing, which is really my area of interest and research, is the duty of health professionals in responding to this. So that can be kind of leadership, advocacy, through to activism and ethical elements associated with that as well. And I think just to touch on this as well, because I think some of this stuff can be challenging and for health educators as well, because sometimes, you know, the people that are teaching now are like, well, no one taught me this. It's really hard to teach because I've not been taught it. And I think there's real value in co-creation of learning around a lot of this stuff. Like, we're all leading and learning this work together. No one's lived through this before. So kind of thinking differently about who the educators are and how we can co-create education, I think is really important. But to speak to that second point around environmental sustainability of health systems, I'm just going to quickly go through this, because I think there's a misunderstanding, partly from, I don't know, the Daily Mail or the Telegraph, that sort of talk about greener care and sustainable healthcare as if it's this like bad thing, or something that deserves a bad rep, or it's something that we're trying to do to kind of minimise care. But actually, what sustainable healthcare is there are 4 pillars of sustainable healthcare. And the first is about prevention, which ultimately is about creating more health. How to create more health in the system so people don't need the healthcare system in the first place. So how do we create as much health as we can in communities so that people are less reliant on coming to the NHS for their illnesses? And if we do that, then you don't need all the carbon emissions associated with healthcare, because they're already healthy. The second thing is then empowering patients in their care. So we know that empowered patients make healthier choices, and they make better decisions, and they take responsibility for their own health. So they're less likely to engage in need to engage in the healthcare system anyway. So again, kind of reducing emissions from that, as well as generally having better outcomes. And the third part is around lean pathways, which will be true for any organisations that's looking at kind of decarbonisation, because if you can streamline your activities, you're naturally going to be decarbonising. But actually, there's lots of inefficiencies in healthcare. We can all probably, even people that aren't health professionals, can probably think of examples where their care has not been streamlined, whether it's having an investigation that wasn't necessarily needed, or whether it was being seen so late that you then needed more investigations, or whether it's that you saw the wrong person, you had to be referred on again. So there's loads of things in the system that mean we're not necessarily getting people to see the right person at the right time for the right condition and getting appropriate care. And so if we can streamline care better and just add in high value services and remove a lot of the low value stuff, then we're creating leaner pathways, improving care, and ultimately reducing carbon at the same time. And then the fourth part is really about low carbon care. And I think this is what sometimes the right-wing media like to run away with a little bit around how it's about low carbon. But if you assume that let's assume I'm a doctor that doesn't care about patients and all I care about is carbon. Obviously, that's not true. But if we assume I only care about carbon, if I went around giving people rubbish care that was low carbon, all that's going to happen is they're going to get sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker until they need an intensive care bed. And then that's going to need loads of carbon. So like, even if I only really cared about carbon, it wouldn't work. So I think that's where people sometimes don't understand that that is never going to be the end goal. The end goal is about low carbon, high quality care to keep people as well as possible in the system, so they don't need the healthcare system in the end at all. And there are obviously some low carbon treatments that we can provide patients, like low carbon inhalers, for example, that are equally effective. So it is just kind of, I just wanted to give that backdrop because I think there is probably a need for some broader patient education around sustainable healthcare and understanding that actually sustainable healthcare is just good care. And I think really kind of alluding to that, the elephant in the room sometimes I think is we don't often necessarily think about what patients think about all of this stuff. And this has largely been quite an understudied area, and actually increasingly more people are looking at this. And what we know is, as you probably know from a lot of kind of polls around climate change, is people care, patients care. And actually, you know, people are seeing that climate change is because of the way humans live on Earth, and they are worried about climate change, and they do want to live on a cleaner planet and want to contribute to a cleaner, healthier planet. So there is that real understanding that this stuff's important. I think it is interesting that, you know, from one of these latest studies, that people don't necessarily see that the NHS maybe don't join the dots as much, that the NHS and healthcare contributes to CO2 emissions. Again, I think it's because people sometimes think of healthcare as this thing that doesn't need to think about its emissions because it's got this positive contribution. But actually kind of acknowledging that we do have quite a lot of unnecessarily high emissions, and therefore also have a responsibility to tackle those because we are so caring about people's health. And just, I'll miss these because I won't have time to explain them, but this bottom one here, you know, choosing between two equally effective treatments, I would choose the most climate friendly option. So people are willing to choose climate friendly options. There are also evidence showing that people are happy to take more climate friendly options that are less convenient as well. So it's not always about, oh, if it's the same, I'll take it. Some people are willing to also do something slightly less convenient if it's better environmentally as well. So kind of acknowledging what people think about this, I think it allows us to kind of make some more movements and do it while engaging with patients and respecting autonomy as well. And I think this really all kind of goes on to my point, which was around, well, what is the duty of health professionals in responding to this? And I think part of that is, yes, we need to be educating around practicing sustainable healthcare, but we also need to be thinking about what does it really mean to first do no harm? And I think ethics is really important for all professions. So any interdisciplinary, whenever we're educating any professional group, if we're not talking about ethics, then I think that's a problem. But I think if we're not talking about climate ethics, then I think that's a real problem now as well, because we all need to be thinking about what's the ethical thing to do in the context that we're working in at the moment. So one of the things we're embedding in Hallam is looking at how do we think about ethical decision making in light of the climate crisis. And so for students here, we look a lot at how can they advocate for a better, healthier future. And what I mean by that is, how can they use their trusted voices? So we know that health professionals, doctors and nurses are always top of the list when you have the Ipsos Mori poll on who is the most trusted professions. And we know that health professionals are well trusted. And with that trust comes power and responsibility to kind of lead for a positive, better future, and to be change agents. And also, I think, historically, we know health professionals have had strong voices around, for example, the smoking campaign, the ban of smoking in public areas, indoors. That there was a really strong health voice behind that. And that can have real impact again within the climate crisis too. And I think also that, health professionals are increasingly being seen as duty bound to speak out about this, about the serious global health risks posed by climate change. And just to speak to that in terms of the kind of advocacy and leadership role, we've had these 6 people on this slide, are 6 health professionals who broke the windows at JP Morgan, which is a massive financier of fossil fuels. They broke the windows to illustrate the fact that this was a health emergency. There was signs saying, in the case of climate emergency, break glass. So they broke the glass, and then they sat down outside and waited to be arrested. When they went to court, the juries weren't able to convict them because they were able to explain that their professional codes of conduct required them to raise the alarm about a health crisis. So they were acting in line with their duty of care in order to do that, and the jury agreed, and so they were not convicted. Again, I've written at length about the role of nonviolent action in health professionals that people can look at as well. Obviously, I'm not saying that all leadership and advocacy needs to go to that extent, and there are some really brilliant examples of student leadership that I think really show us the light for the engagement of students in this work. And I think the health students have done some phenomenal work doing this. This is the Planetary Health Report Card Initiative is a global multi-professional initiative, which is essentially health students saying, we expect more from our health institutions. We want to be educated on this better. We want to see quality research about this. We want to have support for student-led initiatives, and we expect campus sustainability. And they've essentially gone around different health courses. Students there go and look at their own health courses and audit them and kind of rank them. And that really ends up being a driver for change. So there is a lot of positive work that students themselves are driving. So I think kind of engaging students and co-creating some leadership opportunities with them is really powerful in the education space. And I feel like I've been a bit negative, so I'm just going to end on a couple of positive things around specifically some progress we've had at Hallam, which is we've got our health nursing students having a uniform swap shop. So not only do they save money by not having to buy brand new uniform, but they can just get secondhand uniform that gets used multiple times by different students. And they've really engaged with it. And obviously it's quite unusual actually for a university to offer this. So we're kind of ahead of the game with that. And the other thing we've been trying to do is generate some positive energy. So Sheffield Hallam's collaborated with Greener Practice and the University of Sheffield, offering health students an opportunity to do a reflective piece on planetary health and patient health, what climate action means to me. And those submissions are still open to the 1st of December for anyone that knows any health students willing to apply. But I do think generating positive energy in education with kind of prizes and this kind of stuff can just give people a bit of momentum and celebrate a bit of some of the success that can come out of some of the ideas that students have. And my last slide is really I call it a call for papers and a call to action. I'm an associate editor at BMJ Leader, and we've announced a call for papers on the leadership required in health and healthcare. So just sharing that for anyone that's interested. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Romina. That was really interesting, in that I'd not thought through half of the things that you just been telling us about in terms of the health estate. And you're absolutely right that maybe many of us outside the world of health have this perception that whatever the NHS does in its godlike status must be beneficial, and doesn't have any negative emissions or otherwise. And so you've certainly got me thinking, and I'm sure you've got others in the audience thinking too. There's a great question that I'm going to read out to you in a minute that's in the chat, and if there are any other questions that people would like to type in, now's your chance. And the question is probably a more detailed version of something that was springing to my mind. So I'm going to ask my version first, and then I'm going to read out the other question, and we'll see where we get to with the two things combined. So My question was, and in a way you answered it towards the end of your presentation in a very logically sort of sequenced kind of way, but earlier on I was thinking, how does your eco concern, if I can call it that, sit within your profession, within your department, within your institution? Can you tell us something about the friction, if there is friction, and is that friction reducing? So that was sort of my question. And maybe I'll read out the other question. You can roll the two things together. So the question I was thinking of is, the primary model of healthcare in the UK continues to be the medical model, while sustainable healthcare aligns more closely with the social model of health. How can we encourage medical and healthcare professionals to transition towards a socio-ecological model of health? Now, for the benefit of the non-medical area of studies, people in the audience, if you could summarize each of those models as you go through your answer, that would be really great.
Yeah, so I can answer that. So Luke, to explore the question you asked at the beginning around frictions, like I think there's a lot of work to do in health, and I think there is progress. I think, you know, the NHS announcing that it was going for net zero, I think it generated a lot of energy and it made people think differently about the role of health. But I think it has created friction in the sense that it's almost people still seeing it as like another job, another thing to do, another thing for busy people in health to do, rather than seeing the picture, which almost answers the second question, that actually all of this is about health creation. All of this is about how can we create more health in the system, rather than seeing it as like an additional thing that we all need to be doing. And I think perhaps I think where people struggle is they don't necessarily see how this is a really core role of health professionals as well. Like we have to be advocates for health, we have to be advocates for action on this, and I think once those align, that makes it a lot better. And I think where people are struggling is also regulators are struggling with it's tying themselves in ethical knots around what is expected of a health professional, what is too far, which is when you get the people that are being kind of suspended. There are 2 doctors that have been suspended for climate action so far, even though they've been doing that in the name of health. So it can create some tensions and some issues. And I think going to the question about so basically, yes, I agree. You know, medical model very much focuses on health and healthcare and treats. And I think that's the point I made around we talk loads about healthcare rather than health. And I think the kind of narrative needs to be around how do we acknowledge that actually people exist on a healthy planet, and the backdrop needs to be a socio-ecological model, which basically means acknowledging people's social environments as well as the planetary environment that they live in. So recognizing that all of these things are intertwined. So people need to live in comfortable houses with green spaces and clean air, and they need to have access to education, and they need to have jobs that have meaning and purpose, and those things create health. The healthcare system doesn't create health, we just try and fix people when they're broken. So I think the question is accurate in the sense that we are still focusing on a medical model. I think there are moves to appreciate the kind of social determinants of health, but I think we've still got a long way to go to do that, and it's something that we are moving towards, but it's still very slow. I don't have a successful answer of how that's gone well so far.
Thank you. That's great. That leads us nicely into Lee's question, which you may feel is also asking you for an answer, but I think he's probably more focusing on what's the biggest, as he says, what's the biggest challenge for the NHS to deal with in climate change? So what's the hardest hurdle to get over?
To be honest, I think it's resilience. I think the infrastructure is nowhere near ready for what it needs to be. I think, you know, I think there's been a lot of attention on cutting carbon and not very much attention on making sure we have enough resilience in the system. And I think that's going to be our biggest challenge, because we've been world leaders in cutting carbon, but not been world leaders in building a resilient health system. So I think that's our biggest problem at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And there's a comment from Jacqueline, which I suppose is helping to map out the points at which the medical profession in its widest sense, including professions aligned to medicine, interact out into the physicality of the world, and I think she's making a sort of putting a hand up for occupational therapy as a worlded form of health practice that has to come to terms with the materiality and the resistances of limits out there in the environment. I don't know if there's anything you would want to say to add or echo to
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I think occupational therapists are ahead of the game massively, and I can see that from our students, from our OT students. They understand this so much quicker. In fact, the submissions for the essay prize I've had have mostly been occupational therapy students, because they've joined the dots and they can see all of the, the patient that I need to care for exists in this social environment, that exists on this planetary environment, and all of this is interconnected and all of this matters. And I think that's why there's so much. And one of the, I'm a doctor, but I work in Hallam, which has no medicine. It's all multi-professional. It's all interdisciplinary in health with no doctors, and I love that, because there's so much valuable interdisciplinary learning and education that happens, where a lot of other professions focus on the health creation and prevention piece, like occupational therapy, like physiotherapists, that try and keep people well and keep them away from us horrible doctors that try and do things to them. So yeah, I think that's a really important point.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you once again, Romina. We'll move on now to Lee. Lee, if you'd like to load your presentation up, please.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's showing on everyone's screen.
It is, yeah.
I'm not quite sure how to follow Romina's presentation, but I'm going to give it a go. So my talk this evening is quite a pompous title of "What does quality climate education look like?" So what I'm going to attempt to do kind of in this 20-25 minutes is just talk a little bit through kind of some of my experience of education, in particular around climate. And I think this, what I'm going to talk about, reflects from kind of early years children right through to HE and adult education. So hopefully there's a little bit of here from everyone's kind of perspective. I'll introduce myself a little bit more. So I'm a climate change and sustainability research fellow, also here at Hallam, and I'm based in education. So my role was created about 18 months ago, specifically around climate, but sitting within the education team. My background was secondary teaching, and for 10 years I worked in a local authority undertaking climate education. So a lot of these photos that you can see on the screen are from my previous work in Leicester, very much practical solutions-based climate action with children, young people, and teachers. So I've kind of had lots of different experience, I guess, lots of sort of practical opportunities of working with people. And I suppose a bit like Romina, my why of doing this was working with young people and seeing that they benefited and they flourished from taking part in things around climate and sustainability, because I've kind of been in education 20 odd years and the messages haven't changed. We've talked about climate change and the problems when I was a kid at school. I taught about it 20 years ago and we're still talking about the same things today. And those messages haven't really changed. The urgency, I feel like, is starting to change, but the actual messages haven't really changed, I don't think. So my particular interests are, what does quality climate and sustainability education look like? I'm really interested how we use school buildings and school grounds for climate and sustainability. So one of the latest statistics is something like nearly 40% of the carbon footprint from the public sector come from schools and universities. So that's a huge figure in terms of the public sector and where we could make quite a big difference. And then my last really interest is around how we enable teachers to have good subject knowledge and that confidence to teach about these issues. So a bit again like what Romina was saying, we've got people who are in the practice in education who have maybe not come through and understood about climate change, and then have got sort of worries, concerns around how they teach climate themselves. So for example, one piece of work that I've done recently was interviewing about 14 teachers, practitioners in schools and in education settings to just find out what they're doing. So there's a lot going on in education, and what we found was a lot of it is really positive, really strong, but it is quite patchworky, so it isn't consistent. We've got some schools, some settings that are doing some amazing things, and other schools that maybe aren't. So it is really sort of inconsistent, I think, is one of the issues that we see within kind of climate education in schools. So I'll start with something quite positive, I guess. So the Department for Education developed a climate strategy and that came out about 3 years ago. And within that, there were a number of strategies talked about which have now recently launched with schools and education settings. I think for me, one of the challenges around this, though, is that it's not statutory. So it's kind of the same schools doing the same things, but with more support. So we've got something called the National Education Nature Park, which is about bringing nature into school grounds. So something like the whole area of school grounds is twice the size of Birmingham, which is an enormous piece of land. So it's about how we encourage more biodiversity and get children and young people into those spaces. Schools developing climate action plans, so individual schools and trusts taking action and in a systematic and supportive way. We've got climate ambassadors, which is about getting people from industry and academia to work with schools directly. So sharing knowledge, sharing experience. And then the last one, which isn't DFE funded, but very closely linked, is Let's Go Zero, who work, they've got 32 officers that work directly with schools around climate action. And that can be from education to decarbonising buildings, to working with parents, to working with businesses. So that development is starting to happen around education. Like all these things, it's probably not quick enough and it's not big enough, but it feels like things are starting to happen within the education system. So from my perspective, one of the pieces of work that I've been looking at is research-informed climate education. And this is designed to support teachers and help students to find more meaning and relevance in climate change, and hopefully as a result engage more with the subject. So within the national curriculum, which covers primary and secondary schools, I would say it's quite limited in terms of what specifically is taught around climate change. There's more in secondary schools, more within science and geography. But again, from the research that we hear from teachers, it is quite inconsistent and it is more down to individual schools taking this action. So what I've been looking at is how we can develop something that really links in with what children think about, what teachers need, and how this works together. And I think that links really nicely with when we talk a little bit later around carbon literacy and some of the other things that are happening. So for me, what I'm going to talk about for the rest of my sort of presentation is some of the elements that I think are really important for climate education, which like I say, applies from early years right through to adult education. So I suppose the first thing for me is, well, why would we measure climate education? So it is notoriously difficult to measure. It isn't something that you go and you learn something, you instantly become an environmental activist. It is really difficult to measure. But what research does show is that a lot of those behaviours and attitudes are learned in childhood, and they spark that experience of nature. And when researchers talk to adult environmentalists, a lot of what they received and built on their knowledge was frequently done through childhood experiences and experience of role models. So for me, it's about getting this right at a young age to make sure that our adults, our politicians, our leaders have got this from being young and developed later in life. So within this framework, there's lots of elements of which I would call good teaching, not specifically necessarily climate change teaching, but good teaching generally. And what I'll do is I'm going to pick a few of these this evening just to talk through. But for me, the important things I think are around creating agency for young people. So giving them purpose of what they're doing. And by doing that, what we see is that reduces that eco-anxiety, that worry, that concern. It doesn't go away, but it does mean that we start to tackle some of those underlying issues and how we think about that. So one of the questions we often think about is, well, how do we tackle the climate crisis without causing more harm? And that for me is really a quandary. So we know eco-anxiety is distress caused by climate change, and we know Indigenous people, children and young people and those connected to nature are most impacted by eco-anxiety. So for me, there's no point really sort of pretending it doesn't exist. We need to sort of support young people to deal with this in the first place. So how do we do this? So we know young people are concerned about the climate. So one recent study kind of said about 60% were either very or extremely worried. And interestingly, that piece of work that was done linked where they looked at where government responses were negative, negatively feeling about climate change. And it really correlated directly with perceptions of inadequate government response. I'm not going to make any comments to the USA tonight, I think, but really interesting link there. So for me, when we talk about climate change and sustainability, a talk I heard from Professor Sylvia Knight at the Royal Meteorological Society talks about speaking with concerned hope. And I think for me, that really is the way that we talk about climate change with young people, that we acknowledge that it's a problem and that it's going to be a challenge, but we talk about hope as well. So we start with a positive approach rather than a deficit model, which I have to say I've probably changed in the way I teach about climate change in my time. So we start by recognising and acknowledging, and we encourage students to think about their own experiences and ways of understanding, find ways to have open questions and allow young people to share their ideas, which for me, our current national curriculum doesn't do that. It's very knowledge-based. It's very much around learning to the test. But students can consider their own experience of climate change and sustainability, perhaps locally, nationally, and internationally. So for me, that's a really important element to start with young people, getting them to think about where they start from. So if I was talking about flooding, and I'll be honest, when I first started teaching about climate change, these are the sort of pictures I would probably put up. And I'm sure we still have teachers that do this today. Nothing wrong with these photos, but it feels like we're starting with a deficit model of, here's a disaster, here's the problem, what are we going to do? Now, if I was teaching some children in Sheffield about climate change, probably I would start talking more about local flooding. So real links to real context of what they recognise. And this picture I did show to some secondary students quite recently. They obviously recognise Sheffield Wednesday football ground when it was flooded. They recognise Meadow Hall. They recognise parts of town. So putting it in context that this is something that's happening to us locally is really important, because talking about it on the other side of the world might be important to them if they've got family or they've got links to somewhere else. But actually, if it's in Sheffield, to me, that gives them that direct link. Now, if I'm talking about flooding today, I would start with this picture. And for those that aren't in Sheffield, this is part of our Sheffield outside the law courts, and these are all sustainable drainage systems. So I would start with this picture and I would show young people and say, well, what does this represent? What does this show? So starting with a positive approach, and then talk about flood risk and climate change, but talk about some of our solutions and how we're trying to approach this in a positive way. Initially, I think it's a really important way. We need to talk about personalising and localising. So build on what students' knowledges are, their interests, their aspirations, and very much around the science capital teaching approach of getting students hooked on some content and what there is in a local area. So again, for me, one of the big issues with schools is that we've talked a lot about low carbon, reducing heating and low carbon in school buildings. We're less talking about that adaptation in the future. So we talk about heat pumps in schools and windows and LEDs, but we don't talk so much about the flood risk of schools and the fact that they overheat in summer. And we are getting to the point now where schools close in summer because it gets too hot. So one project I was involved with 3 or 4 years ago was implementing some SUDs in a school. So this school used to flood. The rain literally ran down this concrete path on the top left picture straight into the school. So we got some funding and developed some SUDS measures, so sustainable drainage into the school grounds. There was a whole teaching activity around what this was. So teachers got CPD, the students learned about it, and then it was integrated into their curriculum as a real opportunity for the children to be involved in. So again, I think really about bringing things to life where they recognise things. Also, nature on the doorstep. So again, thinking about how children and young people can access nature. So for some children, nature is quite scary. Going outdoors into green spaces is quite scary, and it shouldn't be. It should be an opportunity for them to engage and to enjoy. And as we sort of saw during lockdown, actually people having access to green space is really important. So again, it's thinking about what's already available and what's in their local area. For me, the bit that's missing, I guess, within our curriculum is around climate literacy. So where do we join all this together? So developing knowledge, understanding adaptation, mitigation, and really a focus on climate justice, which I think really we haven't got in the curriculum at the moment. So one of those, I suppose, almost sticking plasters is around carbon literacy and climate fresque. So these, I'm not going to steal thunder of the next presenter, but carbon literacy is something that we've done with school children, we've done with teachers, to build their knowledge and their understanding. So I'm just going to play a little video from a teacher that participated in carbon literacy, and then I'll move on. So for me, that just gives you a very sort of brief case study of one activity that happened in a school, but we need to see more of this sort of positive action with young people and understanding around climate and carbon, because I think that's the starting point. These children are sort of 9, 10-year-old, and they're really interested, but they need to have that knowledge initially. Another interesting area which I think we don't address in the curriculum is greenwashing, misinformation, and certainly for adults this is a big issue. But communication that misleads people around environmental benefits is a real issue. So first sort of coined in the 1980s, but how do we train young people to be skeptical and review claims? So from a very quick Google search from greenwashing, these are the kind of things that come up. We see products that are green, that are supposed to be better for the environment, but in reality, when you start looking at them, they're not really any better. So there's a real issue around educating not just children but adults around that thing around greenwashing and thinking about, well, making the right decisions to be informed around how to do things. Really interesting one is around climate consumption. So where do children get their information from? So where do they access information? Whether it's visiting local opportunities or it's what's in the local area. So again, a really quick search when you look for books for children and things that are online, there's lots of things out there around climate change. So it's not that we should be hiding and pretending this, because we're dealing with things like octonauts that are designed for 4-year-olds talking about the climate and environment. So it's not something that we should be pretending. We should be engaging and embracing children with this. I think for me, one of the big things is going beyond the curriculum. So we definitely need things within the school day, but how do we then engage with the wider community and the wider beyond that? The obvious one is eco schools. We've seen a real big drive for the number of schools that are engaging with the environmental and eco awards, making a real difference. And that links directly to agency and how we get children and young people to take action and group action on climate change. Because again, we know from the research that by taking group actions to make a difference, starts to reduce some of that eco-anxiety. So it could be things like we have a regional competition called Grow Your Own Grub, which is a meal barrow. So you design and grow a meal in a wheelbarrow. Nice little competition there, little spin on words. But again, really simple about just getting children to learn about where food comes from, growing and then developing a sort of a healthy meal. Probably less around climate change, but certainly something about action. I know, talking to sort of children, one of the first things they do for taking action is litter picking, and that might be the first step on their climate journey. So we ran a big campaign around less litter in Leicester. And a more recent project, which I'm starting to work on in Sheffield as well, is tiny forests. So the concept of planting a tiny forest in a school ground means that children take action by planting trees, by then nurturing those trees and then using that as a biodiverse nature area in their school grounds. So I think really sort of some practical opportunities that then last over time in school. So I think the very last thing I'm just going to talk about is, can we be political? And can we be political with children around climate change? So this is what's stated in the sustainability strategy. I'll just give people a minute or so just to read that. So for me, this is one of the challenges that comes out when I talk to teachers about what are the barriers about undertaking climate education. And the top three tend to be time, resource, and politically, I'm not sure if I can. I would argue that climate change is not political. I would argue our response to climate change is. Climate change is a fact, and hopefully most of us, certainly on the call today, accept this is a fact. I think the bit that is political, which we should be talking about with children, is how we respond to that, whether it's policy or practice. I like to think in my previous role, we were very political. So we took children on climate marches. We took them into town with their signs and their placards and their banners. And we stood and we shouted and we made a fuss around climate change. And this was supported by the council and by the schools and by our politicians. So I'm just going to play one more video just of some young women talking about why they were taking action. So when I'm having a bit of a rough day, a little bit like Romina, I watch some of these videos back, or I think about some of the things that I have done with young people. And we have got a long way to go, but I think for me, it does feel like we're in the right direction. Teachers and young people definitely want to make a change, but it's about how we make that consistent across education to make sure those young people then become those adults and those decision makers. And interestingly, Luke, I missed out my slide about green careers. I think for me, all jobs in the future will be green jobs. We're seeing that now with young people. Yes, there'll be some that are very much specifically around heat pump engineers or other really specific environmental jobs, but I think in the future all jobs will be green. So this is very much the beginning of us developing our climate action sort of framework. But for me, there's a real movement in education at the moment where this feels like it's starting to happen. We're currently in the middle of a curriculum review at the moment, an assessment. And certainly what I'm hearing from people that are going to some of these meetings is that climate is mentioned frequently. And certainly my hope is, fingers crossed, in 18 months from now, we see more climate in the national curriculum. So I'll just finish there. There's obviously lots of references there that I'll leave for people to have a look at. but I'll stop there for any questions.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Lee. We have got some questions coming in, but please, people, if you want to pose a question to Lee, now is the time to get typing. Starting with question from Jacqueline, and I guess in some ways it was epitomized by the video that you played, where the teacher was talking about how the pupils could take what they'd learned home, which sort of raises the prospect of trying to teach the parents. Jacqueline's question is, do you have any pushback from parents or even from staff who don't agree? You set out very clearly your argument that climate change is not political. It is what you do as a response to climate change that is the politics. But anyway, we've gone through an interesting few decades in which the environment has not been seen as contentious as such. It's emerging from a fluffy phase, I think, where it's now becoming a lot more visceral, and it will become possibly even more visceral going into the future, particularly when you look across the pond to the United States, etc. Are there instances where parents object? Is this likenable to sex education for some people, that you shouldn't be teaching people about this stuff?
I think the short answer is no. I think the concept, the premise is fully accepted by parents. I think it's when you start getting into specific details. So the two that jump to my mind is transport. So parents will absolutely agree that their children should be walking to school. It's good for their health and the health benefits, but they will still drop them off in the car on the double yellows at the front of school. So I think that one specific, transport, is still an issue, and I don't think that's parent specific. I think that's the general public of wanting to park where they want, but that's a personal issue. The other one that's very interesting, I picked up on one of the bar charts that Romina had, was around, we talked about introducing vegetarian meals into the school catering system. So we have, in Leicester, there was 4 or 5 schools that went fully vegetarian years ago, more for kind of religious reasons rather than the health benefits. It just meant there was less issue. All the children could eat everything that was on the menu. So those schools, new parents came in, didn't question it. This is a vegetarian school. But when we discussed that about introducing that into other schools, or meat-free Mondays, or 2 or 3 days of meat-free, then there was definitely pushback from parents. And interesting, that's what the sort of the chart that I saw on screen was similar. So I think generally no, but when you start looking at specifics, there is pushback within certain areas, which is quite interesting.
Thank you. I've got a link question that's going to build up to B's question, but I'm going to insert mine in the middle because I think it's useful as a bridge. That final video you showed had lots of, passion from pupils. Have any studies been done to sort of chart the sort of emergence and cultivation of the environmental consciousness that clearly your program, etc., is aspiring to, and how that sort of grows or fades over time? Because I just have the unfortunate experience of knowing quite a few young people in my immediate family circle who were quite activisty in 2019, but then sort of got bored with it and it all faded. What is the trajectory that you're seeing in your programs, that the studies, if there are any longitudinal studies, are showing? Is this education for life in that sense of, is it permanently embedded, or is it something that could run the risk of fading?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And off the top of my head, I've not seen any studies where they've been able to track that from in school through to adulthood. It's more anecdotal. So when you talk to adult environmentalists, for example, they're saying one of the reasons I do what I do is because of I learned X in school, or I did Y in school. I'm thinking on a personal basis, I really got into the environment when I started teaching, and I was involved in an expedition to South Africa, to Lesotho. And that was an environmental trip with young people. And that for me is kind of one of the things that spurred me on, because I saw kind of issues around burning wood, air quality and health issues in local communities. And then we reflected that with the children and young people that we were working with in Sheffield, and it kind of, there was similar issues, but in completely different bits of the world and things. So that really sort of spurred me on. But yeah, I think children and young people sort of increase their interest in climate change up to about 15. Some of them keep going up through sixth form, but a lot of it drops off and then perhaps builds up again in young adulthood. But yeah, and that's sort of my anecdotal feeling that primary school children really keen, secondary schools kind of fall off a bit and then perhaps starts again, maybe even at university level. And that perhaps links in quite nicely with B's question, but I won't answer that yet.
Well, no, that you don't break the trajectory. You were exactly where I wanted you to be, which is okay. So what is the role for higher education, and is it a reawakening or a reawakening?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is, like I sort of said in the presentation, that our education system's quite patchwork in that some children and young people come through really knowledgeable, and others don't, because it's not in the national curriculum as embedded as it should be. And quite often that is to do with how affluent those schools are, or where the affluence of those children are coming from. So it is quite patchworky, and especially when we're talking about HE, we have students from all over the world, so actually it becomes more inconsistent in terms of perhaps what their knowledge they've got. But it does feel like at HE level we need to embrace what they've learned and give them those opportunities to then tackle the problems, because we talk about it in schools around here are the solutions, but actually they get to 18 plus and they can be really doing those solutions. So I think for me, it's how we develop some of those links to projects, to business, to industry. But it's difficult because we have got a baseline that's very varied with young people coming into education. But certainly within the English system, I think we're seeing a lot more children and young people with the knowledge, and we should be building on that and not assuming they know nothing. Yeah, that's probably a bit waffly, but yeah, I think trying to build on what we've already got would be good.
Yeah, well, we're gonna now transition to B and John, because I can see that B is nodding so much that her head might fall off if we carry this on much longer. So I think I should let B and John ascend to the virtual stage and tell us what they are doing in higher education.
Well, hello everybody. I think what we're going to do is a tag team, with me starting and then B coming in when I've taken the first few minutes. She's please excuse, she shouldn't be here. She should be in bed with a hot drink and everything, but of course it's B, so she doesn't give up on anything, and that's why we love her. But yeah, so I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but before I do, I'd just like to say that what I'm about to say is not as a representative of Sheffield Hallam. It is going to be my own opinion, because I am going to say some things that are a bit controversial, and then B is going to follow the party line and save the day. Why? Because I am beyond angry. I think it's time to say that. You know, the people that are listening to me, they've been self-filtered, like we said right at the beginning here. So you're my tribe, but I think, you know, it's time now. It's time to stop this placating, warm, hug, hopeful BS that is being put out, that we can just come together and fix this, because that time has passed. We have lost that now. Now we are in a situation that is not hopeless, but one where we have to motivate individuals to act on what is going to happen. This window of opportunity that people talk about, where we've only got 100 days or 500 days, or the rapidly closing window. Well, from my opinion, that window is closed now. We are now in the emergency. We're not looking at the emergency, we're in it, and we have to act accordingly. So yeah, I'm really sorry. I wish I could come in there and say that Lee's fantastic teaching strategies and everything will be sufficient, but no, that's part of it, and what we're doing in motivating young people is part of it. But we've got to accept this now. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get into this. Hopefully you can see that. Can I have a thumbs up from? So what we've got here, and I will come back to what I just said. I just had to vent just before I started there. So higher education is crucial in preparing our graduates to become responsible global citizens, so that they are empowered to act, because they have the key skills to allow them to be effective to these global challenges, and the positive change that we have to enact with regards to that. And that's, of course, intercultural communication. We have to be able to talk to each other across the world effectively, because guess what? We're different. And global awareness that there are people who are going to be unfairly affected compared to others. Interestingly, people always assume somebody else is going to be affected by climate change. It's kind of weird. The research is very clear. Most people, when asked, they're very concerned about climate change, but they always say it's probably going to be somebody else. It's very rarely internalized, and that needs to change. And of course, this ethics that go along with that that we sadly globally do not value developing countries as much as we value developed countries. And it may be contentious to say that. Like I said, I'm quite contentious here. I'm on purpose, but the reality is, look at the media, the way it covers events happening around the world, and we just care more about our people who we seemingly engage with. And of course, the collaborative online international learning, which we're going to be talking about, will mostly be the carbon literacy, of which is hung on that, and the Carbon Action Project was developed, to achieve these goals through the Directorate of Global Development and Partnerships. So that's kind of where we are, and I'm going to break the first rule of presentations, which is to put an entire screen of text up there. As somebody who's supposed to know what they're doing about presentations, this is not what you're supposed to do, but I think it's important that to just outline that it's not enough to produce educated individuals who can read, write, and count. We need to have something going forwards. This new generation, they have to be peaceful, because they're going to get angry. So they have to use that frustration that I'm calling anger in a tolerant way to create inclusive, positive strategies moving forwards, and to understand that once you understand the world and the skills and the values that you might have, and the appreciation of those people around us, we will be more effective, as we are not universally affected, but not equally affected. And these educational outcomes are what we're pushing for dealing with this. So it's for the 21st century, this is what we have to do. Now, before I jump into that, I just wanted to point out, whilst people were talking, I was making notes. This is how sad I am. And it was said earlier that about people caring going forwards, and I think it's really interesting if you look at the research on this, because the excellent book by George Marshall called Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Designed to Ignore Climate Change, has got a research element to that, which clearly shows that adults that are carers, that care for anything, be it their children or be it other people, they disconnect from climate action. And that sounds really weird. So parents of children generally, although not the speakers here today, generally disconnect. And why? Because what they care about is making sure that the person they're caring about is safe, well-fed, healthy, clothed, not breathing in immediate poison. And I know that connection to climate change is undeniable with what we're saying, but we, as humans, we just disconnect because of immediate threat versus long-term threat. So that's a research element that we've got there. And so, you know, this idea that we need to push our next generation of students, not in a hope to stop climate change. There was a lot of fighting climate change in the interviews, and I don't want to turn on that. You know, this, I'm talking to the people who are educators here, not, I don't necessarily want to change what the children, but we need to understand about what we're doing if we get children to believe that they can stop climate change. We don't want to smash them. Obviously, we don't want to smash them by saying it's pointless now, because it's not pointless. What is not going to happen is we are not going to stop climate change. We are in the pipe now. And if we tell children that recycling and walking to school is going to stop climate change, they're going to get very angry when it doesn't. So there needs to be a better preparation for that. And then finally, as educators, we have to understand that in our forum, this is why I'm saying I wasn't talking from Sheffield Hallam's point of view, in our forum, I am fighting against members of staff who disagree with me. So you don't even need to talk about parents and teachers that are turned on. I have colleagues, I'm not going to say who, but somebody came up to me the other day and went, John, I'm not sure you can put that conspiracy theory that the oil and gas companies have been delaying action on climate change into your lectures, right? That was actually said to me. And the evidence is, you know, I was showing the evidence that I had for that statement. I don't make a statement without evidence like that. But that is the opinion, that we are still got members of staff who are teaching things like building regs, a minimum standard, as being an eco standard, and it just isn't. So we really have to understand the limitations of our own educational environment, as well as improving the quality of our teaching, which Lee so fantastically outlined in his previous thing. But you know, so and why have people ignored climate change in the American elections? Why do we not talk about it? Because it's so scary. It's absolutely terrifying. And we have to grasp that nettle as educators and people who talk to people about this. And we have to work out a way of talking to people about that. Because the evidence is out there. The United Nations, 196 countries, in 2015, they introduced the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which if we were able to follow them by 2050, we'd have a sustainable pathway moving forwards. They're great, but I'm not taking any bets on the chances of success by 2050. And so we have to focus. So now I'm in the business school, so we're focusing on options 8 and 10, which actually are the economy options. And the United Nations have already said that before we look at economy, we should try and fix our ecology and fix our society and then work on the economy. But I have been told by my boss that I should work on economy statements to my students, which is just counter the global advice. So there we are again. I'm not going to not do that, but I'm just saying about how little there is understood about the nature of the emergency that we're in. But it's important, you know, and the Paris Agreement, of course, this idea that we're going to try and keep below 1.5 degrees. People should be aware that we have now spent an entire year above 1.5 degrees without the push of El Nino. That's a big concern to the scientists like myself, because that shouldn't have happened. So, well, it's in the models, but right at the top end of the model. So that's a little scary for some of us, but you know, we've got this 68% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. If this government actually stands by its guns, I don't know if it will or not. I can't see into the future, but we need to be aware of that. And Sheffield City Council, of course, in 2019 said that Sheffield would be net zero carbon by 2030, and I'm all for it. Yeah, okay, I'm all for it. I'm not going to swear because this is going to be on YouTube, and there's enough of me swearing on YouTube for something other than something wonderful like this. But the chances of this happening now, snowball in hell, I think, come to mind without swear words. You know, should we stop? No, absolutely not. But I want to see this acceptance of where we are to redouble our efforts in terms of actioning on this emergency. You know, because people are not listening to us, and the plan is there. We just need to follow it. But everyone is so scared of upsetting people. There are some concerns that we don't. And, you know, after much navel gazing, the university has its own commitment now that came in 2021, which is great. I'm very pleased. It should have come in 3 years earlier, but there we are. That's the nature of this. Our Vice Chancellor refused to underwrite it until we had a plan as to what we can do. So aspirations weren't enough. We had to have a plan before they would publish it. And therein is, you know, I think somebody once said that if you aim low, you are in very great danger of actually hitting your target. And that's where we are. We're aiming low at the moment, so we hit our target, because politicians think this is about politics. Just like Lee said, politics is what solves the climate problem. Politics aren't the solution to climate change. It is the pathway that uses that. And, you know, we're going to get our inspiration, I think, from our generation following us. Not all of them. A lot of them don't realize we're in an emergency, but, you know, this is 2022, where Barcelona students went on strike for 7 days and shut the university down because they felt that they weren't being trained well enough. And I don't know, I haven't checked whether or not there is a university-wide module for teaching them about climate change, because it's not compulsory, and it isn't compulsory for us to teach our students about climate change, even though B really tried on that one, and we were pushed back. So I think I should stop raging now and actually pass on to a calmer, more structured view as to what we are actually doing. Please, B, if you tell me when to change the slides, I will. But if that's okay, are we gonna? Do you want me to continue sharing, or did you want a face-to-face first?
No, you can. If you can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. And thank you for Lee to mention carbon literacy. I think I have to thank John. I shared an office with John for over 10 years, and I listened to him talk a lot about climate change. That is pre-pandemic, way before like all this become mega headline. And in my head, I don't feel confident to talk a lot about that, because I thought, I'm not a climate scientist, I'm not environmental scientist. Who am I to have a say in this? Until I attended a carbon literacy training at the end of 2020, and I truly understand that I do have a role and I can do something about it. And as the head of global academic development, it's a fancy title, and I sometimes don't know what I'm supposed to do. But one of the key things that I do is, when the pandemic happened, we can't send our student abroad. We can't accept student who wants to come to Sheffield Hallam to study. And my boss very quickly say, you are the only academic in the global team. Can you create a program? And we are a very comprehensive university. And I personally come from built environment. I don't think a lot of our business school incoming students will want to study anything just construction. So I thought, post carbon literacy training, that is what I'm going to offer to our students on a virtual exchange program to become carbon literate. Because I truly believe that it's everyone's job to kind of take action, and also to learn about how individual, no matter what course you study, you have a role, and understanding your role in this. So we very quickly put together a 6-week program to include carbon literacy, and also we give them the global citizenship certificate at the end. The whole idea is, we have one planet. We all share this planet from different part of the world. And the intercultural competence is very, very key in helping us to solve a global problem. So that's why it's all packaged together. Next slide, please, John. After a few iteration of this, and it's very quickly, we realized that although we made some impact on students, but I think students are still finding it hard to relate to the degree that they study. So we thought maybe we use a contextualized project to help them to understand how they can take this action forward. Carbon literacy focus on individual pledges for them to reduce carbon emission, and also to help them to be that advocate, to bring a group of people, to influence a group of people to take action. But then what's lacking is, how can built environment student do something in built environment? How can finance and accounting student be more active and advocate in this? So we put together something, the action project, to help them contextualize. So for example, in the built environment department on their final year, they all study one single module called strategy facility management. And what we ask them to do is put a lens about climate change. It's the same assignment that they do, but we ask them to think about sustainable management of the campus. For the accounting student, they are doing some accounting related project, but we also ask them to, like, maybe you're accounting, but you're not doing balance sheet. You are actually doing a carbon accounting project. We give you a company data and the student working out what is the carbon emission for the company and actively giving advice to the company of how they can reduce their carbon footprint. So this is very important to contextualize, to make sure that every single student, no matter what degree they do, they take it upon themselves to be the activists to take this action forward. It's not giving them any excuse that I'm not climate scientist, I'm not environmental scientist, I can't do anything. So this is a very action focus, like what Lee say, turning the eco-anxiety to give them something that they can focus on, they can take an action on. Next slide, please, John. And this also, I think, links to what Luke began to say about green jobs, because, and Lee talked about this, all job will be green. It's about getting people ready to put that lens on to see what they do, changing their perspective. It's not relying on somebody else. We all have to turn our job into green jobs. So when I was involved in leading the development of the internationalization framework, I don't believe that we can pick one module to give students the intercultural competence development. It needs to be a progressive way to start with awareness, engagement, and collaboration. Next slide, please. And we think to then become a responsible global citizen in terms of focusing on climate change, it needs to be a progressive way. Perhaps in their year one is to kind of put in carbon literacy to start with, to get them to be aware of what's going on. It's also a level playing field, because like Lee say, everyone come with different understanding of climate change. Perhaps that's where we kind of make sure everyone understand it, they start on the same page, and then moving on to the next step, we start to get them to engage in what's going on, focusing on the degree as well. And hopefully when they are in their final year degree, they are fully ready to be the advocate. When they go to graduate jobs, they can confidently say to their employers, I can do something on reducing the carbon emission, take action to mitigate. So this is the plan that we think as a higher education provider, this is our job, to prepare young generation to fully become a responsible global citizen. Global intercultural competence. I get, when I talk about internationalization to colleagues, some colleagues think that, why are we doing this for a handful of people who wants to work abroad? Intercultural competence is not to prepare for individual who wants to work abroad. We live a very interconnected world every single day. So we need to kind of like get all our students to be able to learn this, to understand that there are different views, there are different perceptions. They need to understand how to deal with people, because there's so many global challenges that we have to go through now. Next slide, please, John. So apart from all these things, I'm very, very grateful that I got a group of very fantastic staff working together on this global climate emergency modules. This is in response to university 2 years ago of their aspiration to have a university-wide elective module targeted on climate change. And there's about a dozen of us, including Lee, Ramina is here, that we work together also with colleagues from business school, colleagues from human rights. We all came together to co-create these interdisciplinary modules. We bring our expertise in together. We also value each other, kind of like skills and knowledge. And within this, because like I say, it's a global challenge, we purposely design COI within this to get the student to have the opportunity to work with students from different parts of the world, to listen to their perspective, to understand the impact they are experiencing in their country from the climate change impact. So I stop there now. There's a lot more that we can talk about, a lot more that we can do together. I'm very pleased that I'm part of this. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Bea. Thanks, John. I'm going to dive straight into Caroline's question. She is focusing really around the idea of how can any one person, student or member of staff, make a contribution in the face of, you know, national level emissions and the sort of perception of, well, it's all China nowadays putting out stuff. How do you counter that scale issue, and also how do you counter that issue of, well, who's emitting now versus who emitted in the past versus who's going to emit in the future, and where's the equity within that? That's, sorry, apologies to Caroline for expanding her question, but I think you know where I'm coming from in that question.
Shall I take that first, Bea, and then you can jump in, see what I miss? Right, what about China? This is a classic one. Well, we start in our carbon literacy by talking about individual carbon footprints. And it turns out that your average person from China actually doesn't have a carbon footprint any bigger than somebody from the UK. So, you know, the what about China, if you look at equity per person, not per country, a person in China doesn't emit any more than certainly somebody from Australia or the US, which is significantly bigger. But China as a country does emit a lot, and but they are also installing more renewable energy than well, I think last year they installed more solar panels than America has installed since they started installing things. So, you know, there's a bit of commitment. But I just want to finish on this one. I'm a massive science fiction fan, and there is a link here, but there are loads of science fiction stories that have a person going back in time and changing something really small in the past, and by the time it gets to the present, there's an enormous shift. There's loads of movies that do this, an enormous shift as to what has happened to the world because of a tiny alteration in the past. And what I sometimes will ask people is like, so if we can change a tiny event here, that single action, the event sort of expands over time, and it can, and if you're focused and if you're engaged, you can make an enormous shift because of these what are called tipping points. If you look at like how dominoes work, you can actually use a domino that's a 20th of the size of the domino in front of it, and so a tiny domino can push a domino 20 times bigger, which can push a domino 20 times bigger, and so on. So a small person, after 3 or 4 iterations, can have an enormous effect. So it is possible. It's hard. None of this is easy. If it was easy, we would be doing it. We wouldn't be talking. We wouldn't be here. Anyway, time for me to shut up and let Bea come in with something less angry.
Thank you, John. I'm not sure whether I will be less angry. Me and John, 2 years ago, we got involved in delivering carbon literacy to a group of academics in sub-Saharan African countries. And they were using carbon literacy as a way to help youth to stop their really huge unemployability rate. And then we talk about, should they stop develop as a country? And then this is, we shouldn't, I'm not from China, I'm from Malaysia. And I don't feel like we should be in the position to tell developing country that they can't build factory, they can't develop their economy they can't build their GDP in their country because of the fear of being blamed that you are creating carbon emission. It shouldn't be any developed country or anyone to condemn to stop anyone who try to kind of like create economic growth in the country. And what we have discussion with them is perhaps what you need to think about is having a green kind of like way in whatever you are trying to do. Like any new business that you create, you should be designing it from a very sustainable point of view from the beginning, but not try to later on 10 years down the line to think about how do you then reduce your carbon emission. You need to start from green. And this is a lot of discussion that we had with academic staff from South African in particular. There's also a participant from Kenya and Nigeria as well. Going back to the comment of that, what's China doing about it? I personally feel a bit conflicts on that because China probably opened up a lot of factory in response to how we consume as a world, as a first world syndrome, that we consume a lot, we buy a lot, we love to own a lot of stuff. So do we blame them to respond to our needs to own a lot of things? And that is a question that I will probably ask people who say China should do something about it. Well, maybe it should start from us that we should buy less. I don't know. A point to discuss.
Indeed. Right. There's one question in the chat that I want to ask of John and B, but then I want to sort of segue into opening up into sort of a panel discussion with another question. The question for John and B, but others can chip in too, I guess, also. Obviously, this isn't my words, it's the questioner. I'm a biology student at SHU. Are there any programs, events, literally anything that I can get involved in related to climate change and environmental issues?
Watch the space. The become carbon literate is something that we do offer normally in second semester, but there are a lot of changes at the moment happening in the university. But I would hope that we can still offer that. And I will also kind of encourage you to go to student union because the current president and your current officers, they are all very, very kind of interested in sustainability. So I would say that go to them as well, kind of get involved and try to champion something. And drop a line to me and John as well. And then we will see what we can help you with as well.
And in addition to the university, there is the South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, which is linked to 80 different organisations in and around South Yorkshire, all of which need volunteers for doing a whole plethora of different areas, from human health right the way through to just litter picking in streams, all the way through to maybe being a bit naughty and stopping a road or trying to bring this to somebody's attention because nobody's talking about this. So there is a whole thing. Oh, thanks Lee. which is the event that's going on Saturday. So they're doing jobs in that one, but they deal with a lot more than that. So yeah, loads of things. Too many to list.
Lee, you've got your hand up. By all means, we'll now segue into the panel. So if you want to just chip in.
Sure, yeah. So the other thing I've just put in the chat is Schools Climate Education South Yorkshire is a group that educationalists that work with schools. They do an annual conference and they're always looking for volunteers. So if it's something that if we've got students listening that they're interested in, have a look on that website because there's opportunities to work with schools through various programs as well. Yeah.
Okay, so my big provocative. Oh, I've just let the cat out of the bag. This is a provocative question coming. A number of you, including in the chat, I'm thinking of Ramina's recent posting, have alluded to a gap between policy and resource, should we put it in those terms? And given the dire straits that the higher education sector is in at the moment, I'm allowed to say this stuff because I'm now not at Sheffield Hallam. Given the dire states that higher education is in, just as I was talking about sort of children going off the boil earlier on, is there a danger of higher education institutions losing interest in their previously given climate strategies and or paying lip service to them? Anybody want to take that? And John, do you want to spit some bile?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I really do. Because the university needs to appreciate.
I just remember it's being recorded, of course.
Yeah, fine. And I've already said I'm speaking for myself, but the university needs to appreciate that this is going nowhere. And if they don't respond to this, then just like the students in Barcelona, they should be very concerned that this is something that people care about. The data is all out there. And if they just put it down as some sort of environment, what is it, ESG issue, that, oh, we can tick a box. Look, we've done it. We can tick a box. They're really going to regret that, because direct action, non-violent direct action, is the next step on this. And you know, that's what's going to happen. I'd rather not, but there are many of us that will, which is a shame, because we've got so much power. Now I'm a social impact champion. I'm trying to do this through the system. I run for political office. There are many other ways of doing it before you do that. But if nobody listens, we can make them.
Okay, on that ominous note, I'm going to move across to Romina.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important conversation. I think what a lot of universities don't understand is if they don't engage in stuff, they are essentially irrelevant. And I think that's the key point that is seeming to not land in a lot of institutions. And I think, you know, personally, from a health lens, we are absolutely failing our students if we're not teaching this stuff meaningfully. We are failing our patients, we're failing our communities. Like, it's just a total abomination of failure. So I don't understand, you know, and I feel very frustrated. When I was very excited, I'm new to teaching here, and I've only been in higher education for a couple of years, and I was very excited to see climate action plans and things. But it feels like, no, and I say the same thing. A lot of my publications speak of how a lot of this stuff isn't going far enough or quick enough. And I think certainly in higher education, there's real power in student voice. And I just would say, with Phoebe that's written in the chat about wanting to get involved, please just make as much noise as you can. Like, I can bang my head against a brick wall saying this stuff's important, but the minute the students say it's important, the university responds. So create a student union, you know, green shoes, call it whatever you want. Just bang the drum, tell them we care, keep telling them we care. Keep telling them we won't pay our fees, we won't come here unless you start caring, and then they will respond, because they're not listening to us as academics, but they will listen to you because you're the customers. So that would be my little rant after trying to not have a rant today.
Thank you. B.
I think to answer this question, we'll probably need to ask the higher education. A lot of higher education declare that they have a climate action strategy. And I do see that as an organization in response to their own ESG. A lot of universities are seemingly doing that. But I want them to answer, what is their role as an education provider in climate change? They may claim that all this climate action strategy is in response. It's like, oh, we got green building, we don't use fossil fuel anymore. Great. But you are education provider. What are you doing in that role? And then this is something that we need to challenge. And I hope that through students, through staff, we can all challenge back and say, stop behaving like this to say that you got green buildings. Focus on your role as an education provider. This is your role.
Thank you. Well, I'm opening up to the oh no, I'm going to go to Lee, and then I'm going to open it up to anybody in the audience who wants to come on camera and or come on mic and make a comment. So I'll be going to Sadiq after Lee. And I can see Lukeman is typing away, and I'm cheekily shouting into the meeting, Lukeman, if you want to, you can have a chat as well, but I'm not going to force you to speak into the meeting. Right, Lee.
Yeah, I think just to echo what people are saying, and I don't think it's universities specific. We've had councils declare climate emergencies, like John said, Sheffield 2019, where I worked 2019 as well. I think the biggest issue with climate change is it's not in our faces right now. I mean, it is, but it's not having to make a decision today on something. And what I keep trying to say to people, not just in the university, kind of in day life, is the longer we refuse to make a decision, the bigger the problem is becoming. And that is the issue that we're going to have in the long term. So yeah, I think peaks and troughs, it feels like perhaps a trough at the moment in HE. Hopefully once we've kind of, however you want to describe it, got through the current issues within HE, hopefully this will be back on the agenda, but it's about kind of people making sure it doesn't slip so far that we can't pick it up again. I think that's one of the things, and it's about individuals working together to take this action. It feels quite lonely sometimes, and it is about perhaps people just informally getting together. It doesn't need authority sometimes to do this. Sometimes it's just about groups of people doing things. Schools, I've seen great examples of kids where we've seen kids do things. It isn't organised in an official way, and that's what makes the biggest difference. I've seen 10-year-olds talking to politicians, and they listen to people. They don't listen to the adults, they listen to the young people. And I think just echoing what people are saying, exactly the same. It needs to come from the young people, whether they're children or they're students at university. It's they're at the end of the day, they're the people that we listen to.
Thank you. Sadiq, if you'd like to make a spoken contribution, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, I think what I see, thank you very much for this really informative session. I really enjoyed it, and I learned many things. The point is about which already have been mentioned, universities, because I'm talking about universities because I've been working in universities for a long time, Emeritus and Hallam as well. So when there is an issue or problem, so the solution they think is the having a policy or a strategy, that's it. So, oh, we got the policy for climate action, we got the strategy for election, then so what? If policy doesn't solve the problem solved through the action. So the point is action is missing. As I mentioned in my large comment, that we have been, for everything we are asked, oh, you do this, what are you going to do about the climate action? But when I say, okay, I'm going for this training or this module, give me the time, there's no time. There's no investment or resources. So the bump here is that the barrier here is to how to move or how to encourage or how to advocate for we have a policy, but now we need to put into action.
Thank you. Can I just perhaps round us off? I'm going to search for a positive, but I haven't found one yet. So whilst I try and think of a positive and invite you to think of a positive to end on, I'm going to go for broke here and ask, is there an inverted pyramid of climate knowledge and understanding whereby the young kids are getting it in spades from an early age, but senior managers didn't get it when they were young, they don't get it now, and therefore where the education needs to be directed may actually be upward in terms of the generational pyramid? Is there a sophisticated understanding of the issues by those who make decisions about resource allocation and curriculum design and university strategies? And does anybody want to answer that question on the panel? John? No swearing.
No, okay. Oh, damn it. I've already broken the rule. Sorry. No, they haven't a clue. There is a real belief. You know, I mentioned some research that says that most people, when they think about climate change, they assume, and it's not done on purpose, that the effects of the climate change are going to happen to somebody else. It's just how our brains work. It's called optimism bias. We all have it, and our leaders also have it. So they assume that the 5-year plan is just going to happen because they backcast what's happened in the last 5 years as to going forwards into the next 5 years. So I just put it in the chat that we've just built 3 new buildings and they are zero carbon ready. They could have been zero carbon. It would have cost an extra 3 million on the 120 million pound bill, and they decided to go cheap. So we're not zero carbon, they're zero carbon ready. And I would imagine it'll be 3 or 4 times that to do it after they're built. So it's that ticking box exercise. It's like, we're doing our bit. Please don't get at us because we're doing our bit. And I don't think they appreciate that doesn't count for anything when we're in a climate crisis. Doing your bit is just a way so that you can talk to your kids without any guilt. And I don't care about that. I don't care that you can talk to your kids without any guilt. It's about making a difference, not about covering your back when you're old and somebody asks you, what did you do during the crisis? What did you do? And I'm going to remember, we're going to remember who they are, who just went, yeah, we tried. Anyway, bile, such as it is.
Thank you.
I think,
Anybody else?
Luke, it's very
Oh.
interesting that you ask these questions, because when we talk about we want to train more staff about carbon literacy, and then we also talk about working with Peter Wells, we talk about we need to target on senior level, including Board of Governors and University Executive Board. And then we came into like stock. Well, carbon literacy training required 10 hours. They don't have 10 hours for us. So we talked to the designer behind the carbon literacy training and Matt, and then they recognized this. They done it themselves, and they created a format that they require a half a day with these very important people. And then the key thing is we need to bring students with us, students who are certified as carbon literate, students who can make demand and wanting to make it clear of what is important for them, to bring them along to the boardroom. And we will set the scene, we will set a few facilitated discussion topic, and it will be staff and student that will sit in the table talking to the very senior decision maker in the room for them to listen out what needs to be done. We haven't done it yet, but me and Lee, hopefully in the next few years, if I'm still here, is to continue advocate for this and train more staff, influence more people. Hopefully we bring a group of students. Phoebe, you might want to be involved. A group of really kind of like advocate with us to the Board of Governors and the UEB one day. But it's hard.
Yeah. Be saying one day it will be happening. As you've seen from my presentation, I make things happen one way or another.
Yes.
It will happen. But yeah, it needs to be both ways. It needs to be bottom up in terms of groups of people taking individual group action, but also it needs decision makers at the top to make those, to understand why these decisions are made. So it works both ways. Yeah. I'm a chair of a multi-academy trust, and we've done training with our trustees around climate change because our children and young people said we need to make these decisions. So it can be done. It just needs to be creative and strategic how you do it. We will get there.
Yes, we will.
Okay, well, I think the positive that we're ending on is the sheer forceful positivity of the committed people who have presented in the panel today. Gulfishan, I just see a hand's gone up. If you wanted to make a closing contribution, but don't ruin our nice upful mood, please.
Hello, thank you for such a wonderful conversation, and that was really thoughtful. That was really inspiring. I had some questions. I am an associate researcher. I've worked with Sheffield Hallam University for more than 2 years. Initially, I started as a climate risk workshop facilitator, and oh, I'm visible. Hi. So I have worked with Vegan, I've worked with Ramina, I've worked with CEDEFOP. So the last conversation that I and Vegan had, that was very insightful. Like, if we really want to do something for those people who are living in these developing countries and they are suffering a lot from the crucial problems because they are at potential risk at this moment. So when we reach out to those people to open for the conversation and propose some solution, like how we can make them aware through the education, through the training. But the point is, the way I and we discussed, that there is this cultural issue. Those people are not very much friendly because of, at this time of crisis, because of the fear, because of a lot of pressure in their minds. They are not very much, they're not seeing the people from the developed countries that they could give them the proper opportunities. So how to bridge that gap, how to reach out to those people? Like, there are universities, there are private sectors in the offices, they would like to have these trainings from the developed countries. How can we bridge that gap? Because I am having regular conversations with those people. What could be the potential solution in this way?
Dee, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, part of the work that we are doing in collaborative online international learning is to be inclusive, is to find partners that will benefit from the training, and then to expose our student and the other student of different kind of perspective and understanding. So yes, you can put them in touch with us to start with. We can try to see how we can work together. That's one way. The other way is I am fully aware that Carbon Literacy Project themselves, they are going international. And then they got a pot of fund called community funding to kind of like make this available for other part of the world, individual who wants to get this training. So yeah, I can introduce you to the Carbon Literacy Project, or you can email them directly. They are very kind of like interested in reaching out to more part of the world about this training.
That would be useful. I think that would really be useful because in terms of the, I hope you remember that the sustainability part of the thing, that if we are trying to reach out to the SMEs, so this comes as the issue that at this point, and talking specifically about Pakistan, at this point when there is, you know, the economic and political turmoil, so those SMEs themselves are not very much encouraged about this thing, that how to educate more people towards this cause. So this is where I think if we can offer these trainings to those people, the potential people there who have got the talent, who have got the tech-based solutions as well, to promote the right technology to tackle to these problems, because they are the people with the least carbon footprint, and we all understand these things. So I think
this is the model we work with our partner in Durban. So they work with a non-profit organization as incubator, but the university partner with the incubator that offer training, and also kind of like they do like what Hallam are doing. We have enterprise incubator as well, and Hallam staff help the student and also bring SME in, so that we have a model here that works for us. And this could be a model that could introduce to university in Pakistan and for them to reach out to SME over there. I think for us to reach out directly to SME in Pakistan might be more challenging, but perhaps what we can do is reach out to a university in Pakistan, share what we do with our local SME, and then they can do the similar model locally in Pakistan. And that would be kind of like better, I think.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there, and we want to end on that positive energy in the room. And thank you, and to have some positive energy left in the room at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night is no bad thing. So thank you one and all, and good night.